Hello and welcome to an exciting new YouTube limited series, I believe the phrase would be nowadays. Welcome to Septic Shock Road Trip, which is our, and by our, I mean me, Clive Davis, and him,
Ron Scott. Hello.
Our trip through all the US states via horror movies, and specifically horror movies of a certain vintage, apart from today's selection, and we'll get to that a bit more later, but this show is a little bit of an outlier, or at least I fucking hope it is. And just to give you a bit of background, what this show, what the kind of idea is here. So another radio show I listen to, they recently did this kind of virtual state by state road trip through the US, where they selected, films to represent each state. And then that got me thinking about this book. I'm just going to change it from gallery mode to, so we can have a well, see, it says in my, it's you now, but I think it's probably recording me. If it's not, you've just got Ron's smiling face and not this book at all, so it makes no sense. But oh, isn't he cute? There we go. So back to gallery view. Nightmare USA, the untold story of the exploitation independence. You can stop doing that now, Ron. It's fine. Okay. By Stephen Thrower. And this isn't actually a state-by-state guide, but it is looking at the explosion of independent horror filmmaking in the US from, I guess, the mid-60s through to, I guess, the late 80s, right? So we're kind of going to be concentrating on films from that time period. We're probably not going to go much into the 90s or much pre-60s. And also trying to go out of our way to choose, regional things with a regional flavor, right?
And so the rule is, just to clarify, specifically movies that were not only set but also shot in that state.
That's right, yes. And that's where we got into trouble with our initial choice. So this is actually our second attempt at this. We're starting in the northeast corner in Maine. We're kicking off in Maine. And when I assumed, as I think you probably did as well, Ron, oh, Maine, home of Stephen King and all that, there's going to be shitloads of films to choose from, right? There's going to be an endless supply. And then when you actually got down to it, there's basically two, right? And they're both rubbish.
Well, to be fair, just to clarify,
right,
there are, every single Stephen King movie is set in Maine, pretty much,
but not
right? But only two were actually shot there, right?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. So in order to get set and shot, there's only two choices, right? So
right, yes. So our first attempt, the technology let us down, and the recording got all fucked up, and it was unreleasable. But first time round, we did Graveyard Shift, based on a Stephen King short story, and I think we both concluded that it wasn't very good at all. Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't very good, but we did talk a little bit, just to maybe summarize before we jump into the other one, which is that we did talk a little bit about the Maine flavor, right? And what does it mean to be in Maine? And we were talking about there's one particular character who really tried his best to have a Maine accent,
right,
which maybe was not entirely successful, which actually can bleed over into our second choice, which we're actually going to do this one, because there's also one character that attempts very hard to do a Maine accent in this one, and I think this one is a little bit more successful than in Graveyard Shift.
Yes,
because Graveyard Shift, it sounded more of a cartoon than anything, whatever. But I think this one is a little bit more. It sounds a little bit more authentic.
Yes. So this time, as I said, because the tech fucked up our Graveyard Shift chat, I thought, well, number one, I really don't want to watch Graveyard Shift again. And number two, it would seem if we tried to recreate the magic run, it just wouldn't be the same. So here's some fresh magic for y'all. That was the main.
So which movie are we doing, Clive?
Pet SEMATARY.
SEMATARY.
Yeah.
SEMATARY.
So I would. It's a shame, I mean, cards on the table. They're both shit, but Graveyard Shift at least had more of the flavor, right? I mean, I think we're slightly hobbled from the beginning. The whole idea is to have this kind of regional low budget, and these are both fairly big budget films that came out for that period where even Stephen King's shopping list got made into a movie, right? So neither of them fit. Like I said, they're outliers. They don't really fit the pattern of this podcast
because they're not independent movies.
Yeah, and they're they're not independently spirit. They're both clearly major studio pictures.
Right.
And then,
although to be honest, this one fit a little bit better than Graveyard Shift because Graveyard Shift was, correct me if I'm wrong, 1990.
Yeah.
Whereas this was the year before in 89. So at least it's still in the 80s, right? So.
Yeah, but the setting of this film, I think, could almost be anywhere, right? It's
yeah,
and you could say about that, but Graveyard Shift at least had a bit of an attempt at something slightly regional and having a certain flavor to it. But whatever, I don't really want to start the series with either. Is get it out the way. I've made this arbitrary, stupid rule about set and shot, so let's just put a bullet in this one's head and move on. So. Pet SEMATARY. I'm guessing you've seen this film before, Ron?
Yeah. A few times. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I've seen it only once before. 1989, directed by Mary Lambert. Stephen King actually wrote the screenplay himself.
And has a cameo.
Yes, he does, as a priest at a funeral.
As the priest at the funeral for the kid's funeral.
And had you read the Pet Sematary novel?
Yes. Yeah. When I was, I guess I've talked about this before, but not here. So, when I was a teenager, I was a huge Stephen King fan. I used to like ravenously devour, figuratively speaking, not actually eating the books, but so Stephen King books.
In fact, I would
actually have Stephen King books.
StephenKing books rather than read them. Isn't really.
Yeah, that's a good flavor. I don't like John Grisham books. I don't like Stephen King books. So I used to read Stephen King a lot when I was a kid. I had a whole collection and stuff. I used to. I have one of my, I don't know, claim to fame. I don't know if you call that, but one of my stories that I can tell is that I was such a loser when I was in high school. I would spend literally my entire summer just sitting at home reading. I never went outside. I didn't have any friends. I never played sports or anything. So I would just, my summers off from school, I would just stay home and I would just read all summer. And
well, you were ahead of the curve, right, Ron? That's what everyone does.
Yeah, I guess now. Yeah, I was pre-quarantine when I was before I needed to be quarantined, and I actually read the book Dolores Claiborne. That book, which was also made into a movie, as most of his books have been. I read Dolores Claiborne.
One of the better Stephen King adaptations, I think.
Right. Yeah, with Kathy Bates. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
no, that's Misery. Is she in that one as well?
Oh,
she's in Misery.
Well, it's Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Jennifer Jason Leigh, right?
Yeah, but I think Kathy Bates might have been in it.
Was she? I can't remember. Anyway, Dolores Claiborne, the book I read in one day. I woke up in the morning and read it all day in one sitting, and then basically finished it just before I went to bed that night. So that's like, I basically just read all Stephen King. I read pretty much everything at that point. Interestingly, these days I almost never read Stephen King anymore. I haven't read almost any of his new stuff.
Where's the cutoff point? When did you stop reading?
I don't know exactly. I'd have to go through the bibliography and figure out the timeline and stuff. But I don't know. I just sort of I think around I don't know, probably around early 2000s. I probably dropped off just because I stopped.
Dreamcatcher?
Yeah, I think I may have read Dreamcatcher, but I think that was at the tail end, or like Insomnia, Dreamcatcher, like around those years. I think I just sort of lost interest, or it became sort of it wasn't as interesting anymore, or I think I just didn't have as much time to read. Although I do remember in the early 2000s finishing the Dark Tower series that came out in 2005 or 6, I think, right? So I did finish that. So I mean, and I think I read or was planning to read the JFK time travel one, because I think I saw the TV show, the limited series they did on that, and I thought, oh, maybe I might try reading that. I mean, I think I downloaded it and then never read it, but anyway, but neither here nor there. So, but anyway, Pet Sematary, yes, I definitely had read it. It was definitely in the time period when I read these types of stuff.
Right.
And I remember being a big, my mother especially, I remember my mother really liking this movie when it first came out, and I think we watched together, because I have vivid memories of watching this, and especially again, of course, spoilers. Of course, anyone who's watching this, right? Once the kid comes back and starts doing the dead kid killing thing, the one part that I still vividly remember is the cutting of the Achilles tendon. Right. So where he comes back and he cuts the Achilles tendon of the old man, and I remember vividly my mother like talking about that, and like and us all grabbing our Achilles tendon at the same time when we were watching it, because it was sort of like this sort of feeling it as it was happening. It was one of those kind of horrifying things when we were kids. I remember vividly having visceral reactions to watching this and watching it with my mother. So
it's one of those specific parts of the body as well, isn't it? Because it's a similarly kind of squirm-inducing scene in The Evil Dead, right, where someone gets a pencil in that area, and it's the go in the film. There's that one bit is
It's so funny that there's certain things that you can take as much gore, but then you just cut just the back of your foot, and all of a sudden people are like, right? Like, sort of like, I think his eyeballs sometimes have the same kind of squirming idea, right? So
what did I see? What did I watch recently? I watched a Japanese movie called Tap, which was the last in the Perfect Education series. And there's a scene in that where they go even further, and like this Yakuza goon slices someone's ankle open and pulls out the tendon, and it's the rest of them isn't very impressive, but that bit was impressively squeamish. So it's anything around there, you don't even have to just nod towards it, and most people kind of do that face, right? So
So I vividly remember us all like grabbing our Achilles tendon at the same time when we was watching. I must have been about 12, I guess, when this movie came out. So
right.
I'm surprised my mother let me watch this when I was 12, but hey.
Right.
Thanks, Mom.
I think I started to read the book. I can't remember if I ever finished reading it. I think I started reading the book. Obviously Stephen King wrote this, and my vague memories of it are, I think it's a fairly faithful adaptation. I
don't really remember much about the book, but I do remember it thinking that it was relatively close or relatively faithful, because I don't see why he would have strayed that much from his own book, right? So
although these things do happen from time to time, and
but I remember it being pretty close.
Right. So basically, just to give a basic rundown for those who haven't, and spoilers if you haven't, and if you feel like watching it first, come on back afterwards. But basically, Dale Midkiff and Denise Crosby are a couple with a couple of kids, and they decide to move to this big old house in Maine, and they're idiots because it's right next to the busiest road in terms of trucks. Trucks barrel down this fucking
giant Mack trucks, just barreling past.
Like the number of times you there's a shot of a truck going past, and you think, why are you living there? You have two children. children who, you know, famously like running around, and you don't have
Right.
a fucking fence.
Yeah. More importantly, rather than living there, I mean, I'm sure there were some reasons why they chose that particular area. I don't understand why the first thing they didn't do was just build a fence, right? Just
Yeah.
put up a fence. The
Yeah.
end. No movie, right?
Or I don't recall any scene either where they sit down both their kids in the kitchen and say,
Don't
look,
go on the
look.
There's trucks. Don't go. Well, of course, the kid is like, what, 1 or 2 years old, I guess, right? He probably wouldn't have understood. Don't go on the road, whatever. But at the same time, I mean, any kid that old, you know, that they run away, you put, you know, guards up. You put, you know, you got the, you know, we had like I have 2 kids. You know, you put up the, you know, the gate in the kitchen so that they don't get into the kitchen. You get the, you know, I mean, you use this. This is like general child safety, you know, baby proofing stuff. You move to a place which has giant Mack trucks, you know, rushing past, you know, at 100 miles an hour. Put up a fucking fence. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Was that right? So, yeah, but I guess.
I'm wondering. It's funny. Sometimes it's an interesting thing between mediums as well. Like, sometimes you can get away with things in print because you're not literally seeing it in front of your face, so your mind can kind of work your way around the details and construct maybe what it looks like. But when you see it so plainly on screen, it just looks
I guess
like
so. Yeah,
you are terrible parents. Like, I have no sympathy. You fucking morons. So whereas maybe in the book, I suppose it's probably it probably doesn't quite look as plainly idiotic as it does.
Right. I guess, yeah.
So anyway, well, first of all, of course, eventually a cat is killed by a truck. So then friendly neighbor Fred Gwynn of Herman Munster fame, of course, decides to, so there's one specific pet cemetery, and then because all the pets in the area get run over by trucks, of course, so there's a long history of this. Although I don't know, yeah, it looks like a really ancient. I don't think they had trucks in the 19th century, right? But whatever. Yeah. But as well as that, there's another place even further out, and it's an ancient Indian thing. It's not really.
It's something. Yeah, it's something with like. And all these rocks are like really laid out this like intricate pattern. It's like looks like crop circles and stuff, whatever. Completely undisturbed over like hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So, but don't overthink it, right?
Yeah, they haven't quite got around to building the house from Poltergeist on it yet, right? So, I can't remember from the novel. Maybe Stephen King went deep into research. Maybe there's lots of stuff in the novel. Actually, maybe it's specific and it's exact, and there's like folklore behind it and everything. Right. But in this version, it's just this is ancient burial, and
it's over there, and it's just on the other side of this thing, right?
Yeah, and things come back to life. So he buries so the family go away on holiday. Dale Midkiff is left to himself. The cat gets run over, and he's like, "Oh, my poor little girl's going to be so sad. So why don't I bury this cat?" And it comes back to life. But of course, it comes back to life as a psycho zombie cat with glowing eyes that scratches him, and he's like, "Argh!" And I'm like immediately thinking, put the thing down before your little girl. Why again? You've put your kids in danger by living next to a fucking this meat grinder of a road, and now you're gonna give your daughter a zombie cat. Like, dude.
Well, here's the biggest, like, other than the fact that they just don't put up a fence, right? Here's the other thing that doesn't make any sense about this whole story, which is the fact that Fred Gwynn, the friendly neighbor from across the streets, right, knows about the cemetery, and he's the one that tells them about it, right? And he even has experience with using the cemetery from his own childhood, where he buried something, and it came back, and it was his psycho dog came back, and he has a psycho dog. And also there's other stories of like someone burying a person, and then that person has come back and it was a zombie, and they had there was like the Frankenstein torch pitchfork mob that came to take out the evil zombie guys, come back and stuff. So he has multiple experiences with this. Obviously this thing does not bring back people or animals correctly.
Right.
Why would you fucking tell the guy to bury his
No.
cat there? Like, there's no reason to, like, like, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, if you knew this was going to happen, why would you even tell him in the first place, right? So
if they'd written in something like, let's say, for instance, because he'd done this, he's had a curse on him ever since or something, and now if you
Right.
pass the curse on or
Right.
something like that,
Yes,
that
yeah,
would
he has
make
he has to have some sort of reason to, like, okay, I need you to do it because I'm actually a bad guy, and I want, I'm creating an army of undead animals to, or or he's like or like maybe he's like just secretly just like a not he actually just doesn't like him, he actually maybe like they fight, or like like they have some sort of like he wants them to, like, fuck him over or something. If there was some sort of reason for him to, I mean, he's like this nice guy. He lives, oh, so sorry. Oh, I don't want your daughter to be sad. So let's go put this, let's go give her a zombie cat. What? Like what?
Because I remember when I was a kid, I had a zombie dog, and that was awful.
And it worked great. Not right. So that's the biggest pretense that I can't get past with this movie, right? So so which is, there's no reason for any of this to even happen, right?
Fred Gwynn, basically plays an incredibly friendly total moron.
It's like, oh, right, zombies, right? I totally forgot about that part. Sorry.
And then there's another thing which doesn't belong in the film at all about. So Dale Midkiff plays a doctor, and a man is brought in, like, with the back of his head blown off, and he fails to bring him back to life. So this again, a zombie or ghost or something reappears in his dreams, and what's this got to do with anything at all? Like, really,
that was probably, I mean, to be honest, maybe you can't tell from when I'm talking about this, but I have a lot more goodwill towards this movie than I had to Graveyard Shift. Graveyard Shift was just, I thought, quite boring. And a lot of this movie, I actually still enjoy this movie, and I have a lot of, like, sort of nostalgia.
Yes, I think nostalgia is probably the key.
And there's a lot of stuff, especially in the later scenes, which kind of work, as a horror movie, and and they still hold up in sort of like in terms of like as an 80s horror film. It still holds up. There's a couple things. Some things really don't, which I'll get to in a bit. But the main, like, just as a problem, as a movie with this movie, is that guy, this sort of dead guy that only this guy can see, or sometimes he can see him, sometimes he can't. And I couldn't tell what the point was. Now, in the book, I had vague memories of this being in the book, and it being sort of like a device that Stephen King uses in order to kind of propel the action along. And I think this sort of like undead person that is sort of like trying to kind of move the action forward. I think it worked as a narrative device. And again, same thing, like when you can't see it, maybe it works, right? When you're just sort of imagining it works. But having this guy with just half his head off, and people just kind of walking through this ghost, and he's sort of like, he's like, I couldn't tell if it was meant to be comic relief, or because half the time I was like, what is this even doing here? Like, what is this point of this? It was so like out from left field. I was like, what is this? So
it doesn't fit narratively either. It
doesn't fit. There's no reason for it to be there. It wasn't necessary, and it just took me out of the story so much. And like, what? It was just made me like, what is happening, right? So and it was borderline. It was so overdone and overwrought that it was comic in some ways. So I was like, it was just not,
So anyway, eventually it's bound to happen. The little boy gets hit by a big truck. So, of course, because the zombie cat thing went so well, Dale Midkiff decides, I'm gonna bury my son, and hopefully he'll come back to life. Of course, he does come back to life as a psychotic little bastard. I mean, and that's it really, story-wise, right? I mean,
and then and then the zombie kid starts killing people. Now, here's the other thing. I mean, there are parts of this that kind of work. There's a little bit. It was quite creepy, and that is where you get the Achilles tendon cut and stuff like that, right? And there's some stuff, but I also didn't understand. He's just supposed to be undead, right? So, but then they sort of have this sort of like thing where they've got this like echoey, and he's like sort of he's over there. No, he's not. It was almost like he was a ghost kid.
Yeah.
And so the setup of him, you know, oh, I can see him running, but now he's over there. He's behind me. Like it didn't make sense for just being basically like a psycho undead kid, right? It was they sort of amped up they're trying to amp up. It was like someone had gone to a haunted house once, and they were trying to recreate the ideas from this haunted house. You know, whoever, you know, the director of the movie had you know, seen this idea in a haunted house, but it like it didn't connect with the ideas behind what the kid is supposed to be able to do. You know, he's just supposed to be
Right.
like an undead kid, right? So
Yeah, I know
it would
what
have
you
been.
mean. It's almost like they've got elements that, oh, these should be used in a horror film, regardless
Yes, exactly,
of
right.
whether
Oh,
they
I heard, I went to a haunted house once, and I heard this really scary kind of like you know, soundtrack playing. I'm going to use that kind of soundtrack because it was very creepy sounding, but it didn't connect with it being a zombie. Like it was just a very different thing, right? It was almost like there was like a
Right.
a poltergeist or a, you know, something like that. So yeah. Anyway,
It's strange
mean,
because, I mean,
yeah.
regardless of what you think of Stephen King as a writer, I don't think anyone can argue that whether you think he does it well or not in his novels, there's no way that he doesn't understand or know his horror. He's clearly, not only has he inspired lots of people, he is very much a student of horror himself, right? So he knows how these things work, and he wrote the screenplay himself, and he was clearly on set because he's in it. And it's not as if the director Mary Lambert is someone, you know, it's not like the Shining thing where Stanley Kubrick was such a powerful presence himself that he hijacked the King thing. It's odd that it's turned out quite so. I mean, just bad. Everything about it's like it's just badly thought through. It's badly done.
Well, I think a lot of like when I'm talking about the soundtrack, like this kind of ghost
right,
kid laugh,
right,
like this kind of stuff. It seemed like that was all post-production stuff. So it seemed he may not have even been in the script. It might have been just sort of like, oh, let's add in this sort of like kid, you know, evilly laughing in the background so that, you know, maybe we can
right.
amp up the tension or whatever. But it just didn't work again, right? So
maybe when they was faced with the end product, they were like, this doesn't work, and then they
it's
were
not
like,
scary
oh,
enough.
we try to get it to work, and but it's
right, yeah.
you know, it's the can't polish a turd thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
I appreciate that you have a certain amount of nostalgia for this and watching it with your mother and all that stuff. So I can certainly see how you have a lot more goodwill towards it. For me, I actually find this film, I kind of hate this film, to be honest with you, because it's stupid. I also find it quite boring. I found it boring the first time I saw it back in the day, and on top of that as well, it's kind of weirdly distasteful, like when they knock over the kid's casket when there's a fight in the
yeah.
And it's a weird one because it's like, okay, let's say you're gonna make a film, like a serious horror film where you're using horror as a vehicle to deal with real horror in life, and you know, bereavement, the loss of a child. That's heavy shit, right?
Right, yeah.
And then on the other hand, you've got, let's have a fun horror film, you know, with jump scares and, you know, and this is like neither one nor the other. So using this kind of tropey kind of vehicle to deal with things like bereavement, and it just feels like it doesn't feel quite right to me. Yeah.
Well, I found myself when I was watching. I haven't seen this in years, right? So when I was rewatching this movie, and again, now speaking as a parent, and we've had other discussions about other movies on our podcast about movies about, you know, parents losing their kids and bereavement of children, some of that, you know, which is its own type of horror, especially for people who are actual parents.
Right.
You know, it's like there's a real like just like a dread, and like just like you live your life being afraid that your children are going to die. You know what I mean? Like that's basically like an everyday dread that you deal with as a parent, right?
Specifically, we spoke, and this is our podcast, which you should all listen to because it's just so good. Magic Morning Wood. When we spoke about the film Rabbit Hole, right? I think
Rabbit Hole, right, yeah.
Came out, yeah.
Yeah, and other movies similar to that, like Manchester by the Sea and Deep End of the Ocean, I believe, is also about that. So there's lots of movies that deal with this kind of bereavement of parents losing children, right? And this one does it as well. And this was one thing that I think that stood out to me this time, which is that, well, first of all, Dale Midkiff is a terrible actor, right? He's really, really bad. And I think that the thing is that role of the dad in this Pet Sematary is it's a meaty role. Like there's a lot going on in that role. Like you have to have a fucking good actor to take that role to really hold this. You have to hold this piece. You go through the whole gamut of rage. I mean, when you're happy, you get to you bought your family this house. You lose your child. You go through this grief, this this struggling and this sort of moral dilemma. And he hates his in-laws. His in-laws have this whole battle thing. I mean, there's shame and grief and mourning and self-loathing and all sorts of stuff going on there. You need to really have like a really great actor. And was just not up to the task of this movie, right? So I think that was a big problem with it, right? Which is that he just didn't do it.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, I can't. I'm sure I've seen Dale Midkiff and other things. I don't have a strong sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. He might be, but
and he might be a fine actor in other things, but in this role, you need someone who's really, really good, right?
But also,
maybe he's fine, but he just wasn't good enough.
I think it's also a tough.
It's a tough sell.
It's not there. Yeah, it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, Denise Crosby as well. I've seen her in other things, and she seems fine, but they all seem a bit lost here, really.
Yeah. I think
even Fred Gwynne as well. Again, an accomplished actor, and you'd think that this role would be, he'd knock it out the park. It seems like tailor-made almost, but even he's kind of floundering a bit because, like all the stuff, like you said, like what's that again? It was my idea to bury the cat, like even though I knew, like, how do you play that? Like, am I an idiot? Am I?
Right.
So
yeah.
So even though
anyway,
I agree with you, Dale Midkiff is a massive black hole at the center of this film. I'm not sure how much is his fault and how much is just the fault of the script.
Yeah, but I mean, anyway, as I was watching it, I found myself just wishing that it had had a better director and a better actor, right? And I was just like, I wonder what would happen if this movie would have been raised to another level, if you'd had just a little bit better script, if they just tightened up not necessarily the story, but if they just tightened up the script a little bit to make it deal with those types of, like, dealing with the grief and actually having like a really properly good actor. And if it would actually just, just a better director that maybe wasn't trying to make it just so, haunted housey, if they would actually really deal with I think that there's stuff here that could make for like a really decent horror movie. So that's why I was like, oh, I wonder why they haven't remade this. And then sure enough, they have remade it, which was, 2 years ago, they remade it with Jason Clarke, right? So now I was planning to watch that for today because I really wanted to maybe talk about it, but I just didn't have time to watch it. So unfortunately, have you seen the remake?
No, I remember it coming out, and I remember reviews being, I don't remember it being, I mean, it's got to be better than this.
It's got to be better, right? So I found myself wishing that I thought, like, it could be great if it was just these elements were taken away or changed a little bit. So I'm interested to watch the remake of it because I feel like with a better director, with a little bit of a better script and definitely a better main actor, I think it actually could be a pretty decent movie, right?
Well, so the thing is as well, it is basically a kind of riff on the old Monkey's Paw story as well, right? It's
right.
You wish
be careful what you wish for.
Back to and be careful. And there's lots of versions of that as well. So it is a kind of it is an iconic story, and you've got the Pet Sematary spin on it, but it's basically Monkey's Paw, right? And clearly that does hold up as a really good kind of hook to to hang all sorts of stuff on. But yeah, so yeah, it is. I mean, even with the nostalgia and everything, in the cold light of it, I think we both agree it's pretty terrible, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Graveyard Shift, which I thought was just really boring, right? There was just not much
See,
there.
I disliked both, but I think I found this more boring than Graveyard Shift.
Oh, more boring.
Yeah.
This one I found I had more to enjoy, despite being like really, really disappointed in a lot of elements. Like I thought this movie had more. I think Graveyard Shift didn't really, even the premise of the story was not that interesting, right? At least this one
Right.
had promise, right? And I think this one was just, it was just ultimately disappointing just because it had promise that it doesn't really live up to, but there's still elements that still work, right? So,
well,
but
Graveyard Shift as well was a short story, and this was a
right,
novel.
and I think that's why it has more to do it, right? So
Yeah.
more to do it. So.
What are your memories, if any, of Pet Sematary 2?
I don't remember much about it. I can't even remember if I've seen it, but I do know it has, of course, what's his face from Terminator 2, Edward Furlong, and the one connection that I have with that movie is that my wife has like a long-standing crush on Edward Furlong. So
okay.
So every time Edward Furlong comes up, it's like, oh, Edward Furlong. Like she loves Edward Furlong, right? For some reason.
Oh, so she must have seen Pet Sematary.
So she definitely saw Pet Sematary 2, and I think I saw it, but I have vague memories of the ending. So I may have seen it on TV and maybe just saw the ending. There's like a house fire and there's like some sort of like I remember something about an eye dripping out or something.
Right.
So I remember I have images about it, but I don't really have any connection.
I remember absolutely nothing about it at all. I know I've seen it just because I've written a review of it and it was also terrible, but I remember nothing of it at all.
Yeah. So, but it was definitely this movie, Pet Sematary, of course, was popular enough at the time that it spawned a sequel, right? It was huge at the time. I remember.
It was a proper and knock it out the ballpark hit, right? I mean,
yeah, it was.
Even though we said, it doesn't quite fit into this series because it's it's a kind of a studio picture, but relative, it wouldn't have been a huge budget. It would have been like a mid-budget film, I think, and it must have taken its budget several times over because this thing was everywhere. It was a hit in theaters. It was particularly a hit on video, I think. Like this was peak teenagers renting Stephen King adaptations for Halloween party, etc. era, right? So I think almost everyone of our generation has memories of, even if they hadn't seen this film, they certainly heard of it. Right? It's one of those.
Yeah, and they remember when it came out.
Cemetery spelled wrongly. Yeah, I kind of remember that.
Well, actually, I have the numbers right here. The budget was 11.5 million, and it made worldwide gross 57.5 million.
Yeah.
So huge hit. Pretty.
Of course, a sequel.
Yeah. Of course, they were making a sequel. So with Edward Furlong, who also was just off of Terminator 2 at the time, I believe. Was he, or just before? Or around the time?
I think it might have been just before, around the same time. Anyway.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, so I think he was relatively big at the time. Anyway, but I am interested to see the remake because I think Jason Clarke, as far as I know, he's a much better actor than Dale Midkiff, at least. So I'm hoping that at least, and especially with today's aesthetic and of horror movies, of modern horror movies, that I feel like maybe there's a potential for it to be good. So I'm looking forward to it. And my wife is interested, so we're going to watch it together. So maybe there'll be we'll do like an addendum later on to this to let you know how the remake is. But the remake doesn't fit into this, not only because it's too new, but it was also filmed in Canada. So so even the remake they didn't film in Maine. So.
No, I'm glad you're going to take the bullet on that one because I'm not in a mad rush to go see it. So we'll see what you think of it. Just something that's just occurred to me, and because it's more interesting than anything to do with Pet Sematary, I think I'll bring it up here. I mean, I don't know where else I'd bring it up, but so Edward Furlong, back in the day, Terminator 2, this film around that era, right? I remember seeing like a segment on him. He's the hot new Hollywood kid hotshot thing, and
Teen Beat.
yeah. And I remember there being a segment about, so he would have been what, 13, 14, something like that around this time, 15 at a push, maybe.
Maybe something like that. Yeah.
And I remember news reports, and it is interesting to me how times have changed, right? I remember news reports at the time making a big deal, not in a scandalous way though, just in like, oh, look at this cool, he's so cool ahead of his years or whatever, that he was dating I think his manager, a woman who was, I think, 27 or 28 years old. And there was footage, of him with his arms around her, and they were like a kind of a Hollywood couple. And I was thinking, can you imagine that now? Can you imagine? That would be a huge scandal, right? That would be like a predatory behavior, right?
Right.
So now it's amazing to me that was just reported on as, but it was like, oh, isn't he the cool hotshot with a hot older girlfriend? And now that wouldn't fly.
Well, I think that has to do with shifting views on, before it was like, look at him, what a stud that he can get it such a cool, like a hot older woman. But now it's more looking at it like what is she doing with a younger guy, right? So now it's sort of like the perspective has shifted, I think, a little bit. So right.
Yeah. So I found that kind of interesting, just to recall that. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with that.
Has nothing to do with this one.
So I think we're done with Pet Sematary, right?
Sorry.
And the other thing we're doing on this show, it's not only a state-by-state travel through, independent horror of a certain vintage. We're also doing a state-by-state journey through 60s garage rock, garage punk of the 60s. So as soon as me and Ron go, you will be hearing straight out of Maine, their 1966 single, I Wanna Be Your Love, on Big Beat Records. Here's the Cobras. Until next time, where me and Ron will be heading to New Hampshire. Haven't chosen the film, haven't chosen the track yet, but that's where we'll be in about a month's time. So bye-bye, Ron.
Bye, Clive. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Here's the Cobras.
I wanna be your love. I wanna be your love. I wanna be your love. You're so good. I want to know you don't mind. All about you have to hold. Ice cream, mix my night with me. Yeah. Hey. Oh, Lord.